Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clouder, and in this video tutorial today, we're going to combine everything that we've learnt previously in the previous video tutorials in this class. We're going to combine techniques such as light source. We've looked at highlights, midtones, and shadows. We're going to combine our understanding of how to create color blends and how to do both feather blending and the flicking stroke as well. I'm going to be showing you this technique in both Copic markers with their brush nibs and in Spectrum Noir markers with their bullet nibs, which you can obviously, if you're using a different brand from those two, choose either the brush or bullet nib depending. As we've gone through in previous lessons in the class, it's very easy to swap out the colors just using your favorite blends or brands if you're using different to what I am here today. The technique doesn't change if you're using different colors. That's the great thing about doing one of our classes. You do not need to have a recommended set of colors. And just to give you an idea, I use this story a little bit when people ask about what colors are required. We've had a lady in our class do the whole thing with 3 markers, 3 blue markers, and she did our skin and hair class. We had all these blue faces, we had blue hair, everything happening. But she was still able to apply the techniques, learn a lot about light source, and you could see a definite progression as she was learning. So you don't need to own every single marker to really learn and get the most out of this. Although I don't want to put you off enabling if you want to add to your stash as well. I do get in trouble when I say that in the group. So please feel free to buy away if you prefer. But I just wanted you to know that you don't need to go out and buy a whole lot of markers to do one of our classes. If you haven't done a skin tutorial with us before, and this is your first one, we're just going to take our time and go through this very simply. But if you want to learn on a lot more depth, do check out our skin and hair class because there's so much detail in there. This is the smallest glimpse at how to do skin and hair, and it's just really showing you the very basics, and we start to break it down into different skin tones, different face shapes, adding more detail, different hairstyles, how that light source affects different hairstyles and textures as well. Now you will notice if you haven't used skin tones with us before, we use quite a few colors to create this blend. Now, much like what we talked about earlier, we need to incorporate highlight, midtone, and shadow. When people are just starting using alcohol markers, there tends to be, you tend to see people just use one color for skin, just a really light sort of beigey color, and that's about it. But you notice if you look at the mirror, or even if you just look at your hand right now, see all the shadows, like if I look at mine here, you can see all the shadows and they're so much darker than my standard skin tone. Where my fingers curve away from the light, they're darker there as well, getting a slightly different tone. So there's all different things that you need to keep in mind. The skin is not just one color, otherwise it will look quite flat on your page. So we're combining everything we've learnt. Let's go ahead and get started. You should have your sheet all printed out, ready to go. Okay, I've zoomed in on one of the faces here. Now I'm just going to be showing you the first color combination in this tutorial. I've given you a whole bunch of examples in the classroom so you can see how we can apply the same technique with all different colors to achieve different results. So once we've done this one, please feel free to substitute out, try other color blends just like we did in the previous colors, or in the previous classes, sorry, or you can try some of my color blends that I've popped up for the hair as well. Okay, so starting here with my skin tone, I'm going to start with my lightest color, which is E000. And the first thing I like to do is just do a coat of color over the entire face. Now I'm doing this with a feathered stroke. Remember, we want to use that side of the marker, not the tip. And I'm just doing this nice and quickly. It doesn't need to be neat. So just like we did a standard blend earlier. Now with this face, I'm going to have my light source coming from, let me just grab my color here. I'm actually going to have it coming from the top left. And that's because I know my face is orientated toward the right, but she's actually kind of looking up toward that left there. So that's the direction I'm going to go in. I'm telling the story with my image. It's a little bit different. That's getting a little bit tricky. We do go through this in our skin and hair class as well. So now we know we're going to break down the image, look at what's sitting in front and what's sitting behind. Now if I look at this straight away, I can see the hair is sitting in front of the face here. So we know that the hair being in front is going to cast a shadow onto the face, which is behind. So all I'm going to do is get my E00 and trace around the hairline. And I'm doing this really nice and thick. This doesn't need to be thin. Remembering that my face is round. Now when we worked on the sphere in the geometric lesson, on the sides where it curves away from the light, we needed to add a little bit of shading in there to show that dimension. So I'm feathering my strokes in toward the middle, but I'm adding some shading around the side of the face. It's also really important to work with the artist drawn lines. So that's little details such as the nose. I'm going to work with that, come around the bottom of the nose, and if you're feeling brave, which I'm sure you all are by now, hold the marker nice and close to the nib, curve it around, and create almost like a C type shape there, bringing that up and toward the eyebrow. And then we've created a bridge of the nose. Also add just a small detail for the chin. That's just a line underneath the lips. And a cast shadow under the face onto the neck there. If you want to add a little bit of detail to the nose on the other side, you can. Just do what you're comfortable with in this beginner's lesson. So that step that we've just done is called shadow mapping. We've used a light colour to map in where we think the shadows are going to go. Now the reason I do that with a light colour is it enables us to correct it if we make a mistake, and any corrections we do at that stage will not be visible once we redo all of our colours and build up that blend. The next colour I'm going to use is my E04. So I'm popping in, this is quite a dark colour and it's probably the scariest marker of all. This is going to be our cast shadow colour. When we talked about earlier with cast shadows, remembering popping the pen over our hand, the cast shadow is always darker than the actual object, and that's what shows the distance between the objects. So that's why I'm popping in here with quite a darker colour. And literally all I'm doing is just tracing where I laid my E00 previously. It's not super duper thin. I want to still see some depth. Otherwise, when we blend, we won't see much of it at all. It's not a blush color, so I'm not adding much to the cheeks. You want to come around the nose here. And this color will soften right down as well when we do the blend. Now we're working our way from dark to light. My next color is my E11, and I'm just popping in here, applying strokes over and over where that E04 has ended. Get that nice and soft, that transition between the colors. You can see I'm literally just overlapping multiple times until I see that line of color disappear. This is just like how we did that feathered blending earlier on in the class. Come around the nose. We always need to work with that detail. You never want to leave it just as a line. E21 is my next color, and all I'm doing is again going over the E11, the previous color, and then extending further out toward the highlight, which is the middle of the face. So you can see here, as I work with each color, I'm getting further and further toward the highlight area, toward that middle of the face. It's really important that you're actually extending each color further than the last, just like we did on those rectangles earlier. E00 is next. And again, I'm just blending out further toward the highlight. You can see I'm curving that around in my cheeks, which is going to create a little bit of definition for me. You can see right now I've got the middle of the cheeks left as a highlight, and all through the bridge of the nose in the middle of that forehead as well. Lightest color now, E00, and I'm just coming over the top of the highlight area, and again a few strokes to blend out where that previous color, the E00, has ended. Get that all nice and smooth. Now we did talk about this in a previous lesson. Sometimes the lighter colors can desaturate some of the shadow areas, so they become a little bit lighter. If you feel this has happened, you can pop in with your darker colors again and add a bit more depth to the shadows. But that is completely up to you, and it'll be different every time you color. Sometimes I feel like I need to pop back in and add a bit more, and other times I think it's looking fine, so it's totally up to you. So this is just really simple skin. We haven't got into a lot of detail here today, just because I wanted just to give you a bit of a glimpse on how we would approach this. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that the skin looks really dark right now. It does. And I find this is where beginners get really nervous because they go, oh my gosh, it's so dark, because we haven't done anything else. Right now, it's the only color on the page, so it's really quite dark. But when we color everything else with the same amount of beautiful depth and detail that we've been doing, this is when it all starts to come together. I'm going to work now on the hair, and I'm using a combination E29 as my darkest, E25 as my midtone, and E21 as my highlight. Now we're looking at the hair, and we're going to look at light source. Again, hair, we go into so much detail in our classes, so really do have a look at those. You'll find so much more depth than what I'm doing here today. But a really simple thing I just want to show you, and I'm just going to draw this off the page here. I've just drawn like a sideways S, so I want to just show you something. So if I've got my sun up in the corner here, make sure you can see that. Sun in the corner, my light rays come down toward the image. Now what they hit first is any areas protruding up and away. So if this is my face over here, we call that a mountain. It's protruding up. The light comes down and hits that first, and that's the lightest part of the hair. Now areas curving in toward the face or down below, these are called valleys, and the light hits that last, so they're the darkest. If I look at my image here, mountains, so we talked about that, mountains curving away from the face. We've got one big one here and one on the other side. Now both of those mountains are going to be our highlight areas. They're going to be the brightest. So all of our shadow colors are going to start away from that brighter area as it curves away from the light. So in the part here is one good example. And the shadows will extend up and toward the mountain. Again, remember light source is the trickiest topic. So if you feel a little bit confused, just color along. The more you do and the more classes you take, it'll start to sink in. I've just added a little bit of the E29 through the part, and let's get ready to do our flicked stroke. So just like we talked about earlier, we're extending our strokes through, lifting as we exit the stroke to get that point on the end. You can come up in your opposite direction as well, so this area curving away from the light is going to be darker. You can see I'm focusing on leaving a gap between my strokes. I'm more focused on that than the thickness of my stroke. That's very, very important. Come through and do the other side. I'm just going to start from the top. I'm just going to move my image around as well. I do find it so much easier to do the strokes away, so practice just doing them away from yourself. Work quickly so you've got a more fluid approach, and hold that marker nice and vertically and hold it close to the nib as well. Come from the bottom now, the area curving away from the light. Now if I look here, I can see that the hair comes around and it intersects on this section. So to me, it looks like this section here is sitting behind this section here. We know when something's behind, it gets that cast shadow on it. So I'm just popping in my cast shadow, tracing around the part of the hair that's in front, which is this part on the left. Extending my strokes up now. Cast shadow on this hair behind, the face is casting that shadow back. And then we're going to extend our strokes from the top. And then the bottom. As your areas get smaller, you need to scale the strokes down to suit. So that's our darkest marker there. Now I'm going to come in with my next lightest, which is my E25. And all I'm going to do is the same stroke, but extending further out toward that highlight area now. Now remember, just like we did previously, some strokes are going to fall beside, some are going to fall on top. It doesn't really matter so much, just as long as they're following that shape of the hair around. Twisting my image here, I'm just going to flick away from myself. So again, make sure you're not focusing on stroke size. I know it's very hard not to, but when you're starting out, a lot of people just don't realize how long it takes to learn. Again, we're not learning basic coloring in. You're starting to learn art fundamentals now. So you're all artists. It just takes practice. I've practiced when I started, gosh, I would have colored so many images every single day for probably about 3 years trying to learn how to do this. And every single time you get better and better. It's all about really just wanting to learn and just having fun. Have fun making mistakes and learning and seeing your progress. E21 is my last color, extending this through. Now again, it's really important with this lightest color to leave a gap between your strokes. You don't want to just come in and do a whole bunch of blending with this lightest color because you lose all of that beautiful texture that you've just created. You may need to do a few layers like I am now just to deepen the colour up a little bit. Otherwise it can look just a little bit light. So that's my really basic hair all done. I'm going to add a touch of colour to the eyebrows. I'm going to use E25 on either side and E21 in the middle. Let's do her basic eyes and lips as well. I'm going to use my B30s in the eyes, and I'm just going to start by dabbing E39 from the top of each side. Not very far, just a small amount, and I've dabbed it so I can get a bit of colour variation. E34 is my next colour, dabbing this in and down a short way. And then B32. And I'm just going to leave the very bottom of the eye as white here. So you can see that was just a really quick and easy way to do eyes, and we've still incorporated highlight, midtone and shadow. Now for the lips, I want just a really light approach. Using RV34, I'm coming along the top of that bottom lip, each side of the top lip here, and then straight down through the middle. And I'm going to add a touch to the hair clip on the bottom left. Blend out with RV32. Small amount of white in the bottom of the lower lip, and then blending up on the clip. And that's all there is to it. That's your really simple skin and hair detail there, all done. So you can see how you can take this away, practice, practice, practice. Yours may not be 100% on this first time, and that is totally okay. Remember, if it were, there would be nothing to learn, nothing to achieve, and no growth to be had. So practice, practice, practice. And if you want to learn more, do join us in the classroom. What we do that's quite different as well from just watching a video is in our skin and hair class or any of our technique classes, I get you to take a photo of your work like this one here, and it doesn't have to be a class image, so you can use anything at all. Pop it into our classroom. We've got a photos for feedback section, and I actually go in and give you one-on-one feedback so you and I can work together, see what may or may not be working. Are we too heavy-handed? Do we need to focus more on light source? And then we can get you feeling more confident with your coloring. And that's the little things like that make a huge difference when you're comparing yourself learning from doing, say, a YouTube video to learning in class. Not only are you really getting comprehensive art fundamentals and everything's fully researched, but you also get that help that's just not there when sometimes you're trying to figure this out for yourself. And we're going to take you and challenge you right through from the beginners to the more advanced as well. That's what it's all about. We've always got something to learn. Never let anyone tell you that art, you don't need to do a class to learn, because it's just not true. We can't learn what we don't know. Okay, I'm going to now move you on. Let's try the bullet nib marker image. So I'm going to be using my Spectrum Noirs for this one here. Now, if you are using another brand of marker, I'd still encourage you to watch the brush marker video tutorial. You may pick up on some different techniques in that part as well. The technique between the two is exactly the same. It really is, but I know people just like to have a look at how the brush nibs versus the bullet nibs lay down the color as well. So I still wanted to show this in today's tutorial. Now remember, the the chart that we went through when we went through the color blends, you can easily use a color chart to swap out the marker numbers between Copics and Spectrum Noir, but I will be using the Spectrum color blend in the class here. Now, just like we did earlier, we're using that feathered stroke, and I'm going to start with FS2, which is my lightest, laying this color on the page using the side of the nib. And I'm just doing this nice and quick, a little bit messy, doesn't need to be perfect, we're just laying color down on the page. This next step is called shadow mapping. I'm going to be using FS4, which is quite a light color, and I'm going to pop in where I think the shadows are going to go here. Now I'm going to do my light source from the top left, coming down over the image. And when I look at my image here, I want to see what's sitting in front, what's sitting behind. Remember, we want to show those cast shadows. So if I look at the image here, the first thing I find that's really noticeable is that the hair is sitting in front of the face. So we know automatically that the hair is going to cast a shadow back on the face area. So using my FS4, I'm just putting it down a nice big thick cast shadow around. Now remembering when we coloured the sphere, if we've got a rounded object, as it curves away from the light, we want to add in some shading to the sides to show that it's three-dimensional. So bringing my colour down along the sides. If we make a mistake with this light colour, just go over the top, get it right, because when you blend it out, you won't be able to tell that you've made any mistakes. It's important to always work with the artist drawn lines on the image as well here. So we can see the little nose that she's drawn in, so let's draw some detail with that. Cast shadow underneath the nose, and then I'm going to hold the marker nice and close to the nib, hold it quite upright here for control, and then I'm just extending back and up a detail line for the bridge of the nose. You can do this in the other direction as well to just define it. Just a line under the lips to show the chin, and then a cast shadow up and under the face onto the neck. Now that we've done that, we can jump ahead to a much darker colour. This is my TN4. Now if you didn't watch the marker video with Copics, again, I'm just putting my marker over my hand. You can see that cast shadow that my marker is casting back onto my hand. Cast shadow is cast on the object that's in front or above, back on the object below here. And notice that that shadow is considerably darker than my hand. It has to be darker to show that depth and distance. And that's what this color is for. Don't be nervous, we will blend it down a little bit. So just popping in, I'm literally just tracing where I did my shadow mapping earlier. So once you've done that, all the hard work is done. Hold the marker nice and close to the nib. Let's come in and do that bridge of the nose there. You can work on now blending that out. FS9 is next. Multiple strokes over where that TN4 has ended, just get it blending out and then extend further toward the highlight area. We want to make sure with each color that we actually extend further toward the highlight. FS4 is next, same thing, a few strokes over where that previous color has ended, extend toward the highlight area. Now I do take you through quite a few different colour blends in the skin and hair class, and even some that are deeper or slightly different tone as well. But this is just a really good basic one for us to start with in this free class today. You can see I'm starting to round the cheeks out as well. So at the moment I've got the middle of the cheeks and the forehead as our highlight areas, keeping that nice and light. And FS2 is my lightest colour. I'm just going to concentrate on blending out where the FS4 has ended, and then a quick layer over the remaining highlight area. Now again, I find that these markers tend to desaturate a lot. So that means that lightest marker is pulling away that darker pigment. So I do like to pop in and repeat my previous steps. I find the ink just holds a lot better the second time around. We do end up with a lot more depth this way. Blending out FS9 is next. Now remember, when you're colouring skin, it always looks super dark at this point, and that's because it's the only colour that's down on the page. So people tend to get a little bit nervous at this point, but don't worry, once we come through and we do the hair or any other details that have that beautiful contrast and show the light and shade, it does all come together very nicely. FS4 is next. And start to curve out that detail. And FS2 is last, and just blend that all together. Going to move on to the hair, and I'm just going to explain this like I did in the Copic part of the lesson as well. Just do this down here. When we colour the hair, we've got these two shapes which are quite prominent. I'm just going to draw my sun in this top corner here. The light rays would come down toward the image. Now any part of the hair that's curving away from the face, curving out like this, we call a mountain, and that's where the light rays come down and hit first. So that's the lightest part of the hair. Any parts that are curving in back toward the face are called valleys. Now these are the darkest parts and where the sun hits last. So we want to keep those in mind when colouring hair. Again, we break this down for so many different hairstyles in our skin and hair class, but just very quickly today, I can see that I've got two main mountains. I've got this big one over here and the one on the other side here. Now these two curve away from the light, so these are going to be the lightest areas. We're going to lay down our darkest colour in the shadow areas, which will be at the two opposite ends here as the hair curves away from the light. Pop a little bit of detail in the part, and remember, just like we did earlier, we're going to do that flick technique. Hold the marker close to the nib, hold it upright, and we're going to lift as we exit the stroke. Now remember, do not focus on flick thickness. That comes with time. So just practice on the technique, practice separating your strokes. That's very, very important. You'll notice I turned my image on the side here, and it is so much easier to get a curved stroke flicking away from yourself. So do practice that as well, especially with bullet tips. Bullet tips are harder to use than brush. Definitely they are. You can get brush nibs for your Spectrum Noirs, but we can still get beautiful results. It just takes practice. Now if I look at the hair here, I can see that there's an intersection happening here. And it actually looks like to my eye that this section on the right is behind the section on the left. So remembering that the section behind gets the shadow, I'm just going to trace up and around that section that's in front. In the smaller areas, we do need to scale our strokes back. Next color is my EB3, and I'm just doing the exact same thing I just did, just extending these strokes further up this time. Now some strokes are going to naturally fall on top, some are going to fall beside what you've just did. Doesn't matter so long as they are more focused on following the shape of the hair. And lastly, my TN4. Again, make sure you're separating your strokes, leaving a gap between. Add a touch of shading to the eyes. I'm going to add a bit of TB5 here at the top of each side TB3 to blend out a little bit. And then bring your TB1 toward the bottom. You can leave a little circle of white at the bottom. Adding a touch of colour to the eyebrows, EB3 on either side. Now another thing with the hair, I noticed that my shadows again are still quite desaturated. You can absolutely come back in again and deepen the shadows up for a crisper finish. Just repeat what you've previously done. I'm adding a touch of CR6 along the top of the bottom lip, either side of the top lip and through the middle. And you can even add a touch to the hair clip as well. And that's her skin and hair all done. So I've got the two images here. I can even zoom out. So we've got brush tip markers and bullet tip markers you can apply the same technique to and still get beautiful results no matter which brand you're using. As I explained before, we go through so much more detail, skin types, colours, directions, details, hairstyles, and a lot more in our skin and hair class. And if you want that extra help, it's really important that you upload in our photos for feedback section. That's the whole point of doing a class, is that there is help there for you. So I hope you've enjoyed putting together everything you've learnt from these previous tutorials. I hope you've had fun in this class and you've learnt quite a lot. And this is just the start of your colouring journey. From here, there's a lot more to learn, a lot more practice to be done, but you can absolutely do this and have fun and compare your progress only to yourself. Just enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this class, and we hope to see you in the classroom in the future. Thanks for watching.